Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Simon Marks in Washington, D.C. and let's start with the top headlines of this Monday. High voltage drama in Pakistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan is to protest against the opposition as hearings continue in the country's top court over the dissolution of the National Assembly. Sri Lanka gets a temporary cabinet. New foreign, finance, education and highways ministers are appointed a day after all 26 cabinet ministers resigned amid the country's continuing economic crisis. Bangladesh's administration is under fire from the opposition and social media after a Hindu teacher was allegedly harassed and attacked by a police officer for wearing a bindi in Dhaka. French far-right presidential candidate Marine Le Pen continues to close the gap on Emmanuel Macron as the two battle it out over pension reforms just days ahead of the country's election. Russia accuses Ukraine of staging war crimes in Bucha amid global outrage and evidence of gross violations of human rights by Russian troops following the discovery of mass graves near Kyiv. And shares in Twitter soar more than 25% after Elon Musk buys a 9% stake in the social media company.
Pakistan political play enters slogovers. Imran's reverse swing stuns opposition.
एक इलेक्टेड 22 करोड़ की कौम जिसकी इलेक्टेड हुकूमत को गिराने की कोशिश की गई है, इस साजिश से वो आज फेल हो गई है।
National Assembly dissolved. No trust motion rejected. Captain Khan calls for early elections. Opposition knocks on top court's door.
In a total disaster, and what a shame and embarrassment they've brought to Pakistan.
The Pakistani president.
And so we begin today in Pakistan, where a political crisis is now at its peak. Prime Minister Imran Khan called for early elections after advising the country's president to dissolve both assemblies. After the Sunday showdown in the National Assembly, Imran Khan delivered multiple addresses to the nation. When and how Pakistan might go for early polls is not yet clear, but it seems that the Prime Minister is already in campaign mode. In his latest address to the nation via Pakistan's state broadcaster, he urged citizens to join protests against people he accuses of trying to topple his government in collaboration with foreign countries. He also called for protests outside a hotel in Lahore, where he claims those indulging in political horse trading are lodged.
जब हमने इलेक्शन अनाउंस कर दिए तो मेरा सवाल ये है कि ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट में आप क्या कर रहे हैं? ये चाह रहे हैं कि हुकूमत बहाल हो। तो मैं सिर्फ आपके सामने ये रखना चाहता हूं कि क्या ये बेहतर है अवाम के पास जाके अवाम की वोट से आना, या एक बाहर की साजिश का हिस्सा बन के और 20 से 25 करोड़ रुपया दे के पार्लियामेंटेरियंस के ज़मीर खरीद के क्या हुकूमत बनाना ये बेहतर है, या एक पब्लिक के पास जाएं कि जी इलेक्शन हो, जो पब्लिक जैसे वोट देती है। अवाम को मैं आज सबको आपको कह रहा हूं कि आपको प्रोटेस्ट करना चाहिए। मैंने आज अनाउंस कर रहा हूं कि मैं आज शाम को मैं भी इस प्रोटेस्ट में शामिल होऊंगा। हम ये रेड जोन के बाहर इस्लामाबाद में आज प्रोटेस्ट करेंगे, पुरअमन प्रोटेस्ट। हमेशा हमारा प्रोटेस्ट पुरअमन होता है, लेकिन इसके खिलाफ करेंगे ये जो गद्दारी हो रही है मुल्क के खिलाफ। गद्दारी का मतलब ये है कि बाहर के एजेंडे के ऊपर हुकूमत को गिराने की कोशिश है, और दूसरी तरफ ये जो ख़रीदे जा रहे हैं पॉलिटिशियंस, उनकी रेट्स लगी हुई हैं, उनको जो ख़रीदा जा रहा है, ये बिल्कुल इसके ख़िलाफ़ मैं आज अपने लोगों के साथ प्रोटेस्ट करूँगा।
Pakistan has been struggling with extreme inflation for months now. Prices of essential goods are at unprecedented levels. And the Prime Minister has linked this to the no-confidence motion, claiming that the economy has been under building pressure since the motion was filed. He blamed the opposition for creating political turmoil that is putting added pressure on the Pakistani rupee.
जब से ये नो कॉन्फिडेंस हुआ है, आप देख लें कि सारे मुल्क में रुपए पे प्रेशर पड़ा हुआ है। बिल्कुल एक बुरहान का अलमिया बना हुआ है। लोग इस वक्त किसी को नहीं पता आगे क्या होगा, और वो सबसे बुरा होता है आपकी इकोनॉमी के लिए। तो मैं ये जो लोगों से पूछना चाहता हूँ, ये जो सारी ऑपोजिशन मेंबर्स हैं, इनको क्या ज़रूरत पड़ी थी इसको गवर्नमेंट को डिस्टेबलाइज करने की और नो कॉन्फिडेंस? क्योंकि एक इनको बाहर से इनका प्लान 6 महीने से चल रहा था, जो कि हमारे पास एविडेंस है, जिसकी वजह से स्पीकर ने रूलिंग दी।
And WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Anas Malik has sent us this report with all the latest from Islamabad.
The uncertainty leads to chaos, and that is what we're witnessing here in Pakistan at this point of time, because we have a headless state, quite literally. There is no government, there is no functional government per se. Imran Khan is continuing with his post of the Prime Minister under Article 224, despite of dissolving the assemblies under the article which gives him the authority to be the Prime Minister until the new or interim Prime Minister is sworn in, and that is how he is surviving. As I said, there is uncertainty that is continuing. A court case that is currently being heard, a suo motu that is being heard by the Chief Justice and the 5-member bench, to be precise. They have adjourned their proceedings, and now they are debating on the fundamental of dissolving the assembly, rather the ruling of the speaker that called for the no confidence motion to be illegal, and that's how the Prime Minister's bargain for a dissolution, the Prime Minister's right to dissolution of assemblies was reinstated. So there's lots of hodgepodge around. The Prime Minister has nominated on behalf of his party former Chief Justice of Pakistan, Justice Gulzar Ahmed, as the interim Prime Minister for consideration to the President. They're awaiting a reply from the opposition, but there is no opposition at this point of time. So we're expecting the court to move in probably tomorrow or day after and settle this matter, because if it doesn't, then that would be a precedent and not a good one for time to come, at least for the future governments.
Sri Lanka is also struggling with multiple crises. The entire cabinet has resigned. The embattled president has invited the opposition to join a unity government. All this as irate Sri Lankans came out onto the streets to protest against curfew orders and worsening economic conditions. Fresh reports suggest that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has managed to form a temporary cabinet. This is its makeup for now. Until a permanent cabinet is formed, G.I. Peris will serve as the country's foreign minister. Ali Sabri has been sworn in as the new finance minister. Dinesh Gunawardena has been sworn in as Education Minister, and Johnston Fernando has been sworn in as the Minister of Highways. The new cabinet was formed after all 26 ministers in the government submitted letters of resignation last night. Everyone except the Rajapaksa brothers quit. After the ministers tendered their resignations, the move cleared the way for the president to appoint a new cabinet. Sri Lanka's central bank governor, Ajit Nivard Cabral, also resigned. Meanwhile, protests are currently underway in various parts of the island nation. They're taking place even as emergency law puts a strict prohibition in place against public assembly. For more, I'm joined now by Alan Keenan, a senior consultant on Sri Lanka for the International Crisis Group. He is right here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Keenan, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Let me start by asking you if the resignation of the cabinet in any way has eased the pressures that have been mounting against President Rajapaksa.
No, I don't think so. I think it's the first step in what will be a many-step process that really no one has a clue, where it will ultimately end. And of course, the big irony is that the protests, the chants of the protests and the hashtags online on social media have been "Gota, go home," "Gotabaya, go home." So everyone's gone home, but not Gotabaya. So I think the protests are very much directed against the president first, the ruling family, the other Rajapaksas second, and the government third, and the political class fourth. Those are the targets. And so I don't think until I think we're just at the beginning of a very complicated kind of game of political chess that no one really can foresee the ultimate outcome.
And so this effort to reach out to the opposition and invite them to essentially join a unity government, too little, too late?
Well, I think here's what's happening. Gotabaya wants to cling to power. So he's trying to figure out some way to hold on despite the mass protests, which, as I said, are directed at him. But there are two constraints. So there's the problem with that is a lot of other people in the opposition don't want to join a cabinet under Gotabaya, partly because they know the popular sentiment is very much against Gotabaya and against the Rajapaksa family, but also because they will be taking on the responsibility of dealing with an economic and political crisis that is unparalleled in Sri Lanka's history. The economy is in complete nosedive, and even if it is rescued, as many people hope it will be, through the intervention of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who will then help to sort of negotiate with the international creditors some kind of reduced debt load, that will be done in exchange for very harsh restructuring policies. There will be, almost certainly large-scale austerity. There will be people will lose jobs in the government. The taxes will be raised. The budget deficit will be cut down. Whole range of things that will be very painful. And Sri Lanka's, having a lot of economic pain now. Average Sri Lankans are suffering a lot, but they're going to continue to suffer no matter what happens. And I think very few politicians are going to want to jump in and be responsible for that. So that's, I think, one of the key issues right now. On the other hand, no one also really wants to be president under this current situation. So if Gotabaya did resign, we'd still have the problem of who's going to take it up, who's going to take up that job. So I think, in some sense, it's a bit of musical chairs, and no one really wants to sit down and see who's in the hot seat in the end.
And how much risk are protesters taking as they take to the streets, even in the face of emergency laws that, on the face of it, ban public assembly? Yeah,
well, I think the way I see the situation right now is there's a good news story and there's a bad news story. The bad news story is what we were just talking about, the current economic suffering that people are facing, truly, monumental proportions. And that's going to, as I said, even if it gets better, it's also going to get worse. So that's the bad news. The good news is that, first of all, that these protests are happening at all, that they began to happen, and that they named the problem very clearly, that it was Gotabaya and his administration's rule and incompetence, and that even in the face of initial police repression, we saw that last Thursday outside the house of Gotabaya, the protest that took place outside his house, and then the declaration of the state of emergency and the curfew, that despite all of that, people are asserting their democratic rights against a government which just a few months ago people were terrified of, many. Given the ruthless nature of the rule of the Rajapaksas when Mahinda, the brother of the current president, was president, and when Gotabaya was the head of the security forces then. So the fact that people are protesting in spite of that fear which has, I think, slipped away now. And in spite of the long history of police repression of protests and state of emergency, curfew, that's all very positive. Now, it comes from people's anger at their at the suffering they're going through and the maladministration which led to this suffering. But it's still quite a positive story as well. And I think, the corollary of that is just a few months ago, over certainly the last couple of years, many analysts, including diplomats and people, sort of officials of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, have been very worried about the risk of large-scale human rights violations of the emergence of a truly authoritarian, repressive regime in Colombo. That is, we're not out of the woods yet. That's still a possibility. But I think the weakness of Gotabia and the weakness of his family makes that much less of a risk now. So that's all positive.
Alan Keenan of the International Crisis Group, thanks very much indeed for shining a light on events in Sri Lanka for us here on WION. He is with the International Crisis Group right here in Washington, D.C. The Taliban government in Afghanistan has reintroduced a ban on the cultivation of the poppy plant, the source, of course, of opium. The Taliban has levied a total ban on all intoxicants, including wine, cannabis and heroin. The Taliban spokesperson, Zabihullah Mujahid, said that violators will be penalised under Islamic Sharia law.
فرمان عالی قدر امیرالمؤمنین حفظه الله در مورد ممنوعیت کشت کوکنار و هر گونه مواد نشه‌آور به اساس فرمان عالی قدر امیرالمؤمنین به تمام هموطنان خبر داده می شود که از تاریخ صدور این فرمان کشت کوکنار در تمام کشور به گونه مطلق منع می باشد. پس از این هیچ کس نمی تواند این بوته را کشت نماید. اگر خدای نخواسته کسی تخلف کرد، کشت او از بین برده می شود و با متخلفین از روی شریعت اسلامی برخورد صورت می گیرد.
The move has raised the feeling of insecurity among poppy farmers. They say the measure will further cripple their livelihood and lure people to other illegal activities, including theft. Opium is one of the major sources of employment in the country, which has a contribution of nearly 120,000 jobs, according to a United Nations survey.
برای چی صبر تو که سری غلط داری ولانی بالش بنسه باشه نه جوری نه بنده جوری نه کالاک جوری نه ریحان جوری نه جواری سر جوری نه انار جوری نه باشه جوری خپل د لاس خاري لا نه در جوړي بلشي هغه مصرف پاتسکه چې ته د لاس خاري وکړې هغه نه.
The United States says the drug trade in Afghanistan accounts for up to 60% of the Taliban's annual revenue, and this strengthened the security concerns of the United States. In 2000, the Taliban banned opium in the hope of gaining international recognition. The United Nations was at the time running alternative development projects in Afghanistan and promised an additional investment in the country. But when the UN shut down its operations in the country, farmers returned to poppy cultivation, which led to the deterioration of the Taliban's relationship with the United States and was eventually a factor that led to the US intervention that lasted in the country for 20 years. Moving on to the crisis in Ukraine, Kharkiv has been the worst affected city in the country. It's the second most populous city in Ukraine, and it has been facing constant shelling and gun battles since the Russian invasion began on February the 24th. Over 1 month later, this is what's left of the city.
Where homes once stood, there are now piles of rubble. This is Yakovlivka, a village home to about 600 people, around 19 miles from the Ukrainian northeastern city of Kharkiv. It was hit by Russian bombing on March the 3rd, leaving houses destroyed and craters in the ground. Reuters met local resident Vera Babenka there. The 66-year-old's house was damaged by the shelling. Babanka said she was in the house when an attack occurred. She and her family ran out and hid under a cage when they heard aircraft flying ahead. A pile of rubble and a fridge is all that remains of her kitchen. Her son Yuri showed Reuters a crater caused by the explosion just yards from the building.
Nobody believed that after such an explosion, anyone could survive.
Russia denies attacking civilians in what it says is a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify its southern neighbour. Ukraine and its Western allies say that is a baseless pretext for a war of aggression. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday the military situation in the east of the country remained difficult, warning that Russia was preparing for new strikes in Kharkiv and the Donbass region. But for now, residents in Yakovlivka are banding together to help rebuild what remains of their village. For Vera, she says the first thing to do is to rebuild her kitchen.
Finally from us today, the kaleshi is an important part of traditional Albanian attire. It's a hat made of wool, a craft rendered obsolete with the introduction of machine-manufactured hats. But one family in the Albanian capital Tirana is keeping the tradition of making these hats by hand alive. We're going to leave you with that story. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, for the Tuesday edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. Stay with WION. World is one.
Here in this old bazaar in Croia, Albania, is a tiny shop that has kept up with the tradition of making kaleshi by hand. Once a popular accoutrement, the kaleshi is a traditional Albanian wool hat. And the 12-step process of making them by hand is not a skill many have. But this tiny family-run shop is hoping to change that and highlight the novelty and ingenuity of the kaleshi. The Guni family is one of the very few families that have passed it down generations.
These are part of our cultural heritage. It's a handcraft which luckily has survived to our days. We have managed to preserve it with many sacrifices.
Handmade kaleshi lost popularity when machine-made cheaper hats started trickling in. The Guni family here offers a variety of shapes and sizes for the kaleshi, which has many variations across cultures and even regions.
This is a great value for Croia, and it's a great value for Albania, for entire Albania. And it needs to be promoted because people need to know and also to see how really was a handcraft, and how to preserve the old traditions, how important it is to preserve it, and how good it is for Albania to promote this kind of people, and to help them not to forget this old tradition, making the traditional hat, or not only, but also all the main crafts.
The tourism industry was dealt a huge blow by the pandemic. And the Guni family hopes that it is rare traditional gems like this one that will help boost business. In fact, they've managed to find buyers in Western European countries like France and Germany who are happy to accompany them on the journey to give the handmade kaleshi the recognition it deserves. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
There are many other... this is right, Arab.